Okay, thank you. So the previous talks have set me up perfectly, so that's great. So I'm going to talk about insights and challenges to integrating data from diverse networks rather than just sort of a single one. So first of all, why should we do this? Anyway, what's the motivation for taking data from multiple networks and trying to put them together in sort of creative ways? Well, at the continental scale, we have a lot of heterogeneity in both our drivers and our response variables. So this is, of course, a production or biomass map. And so, of course, there's rainfall variation, soil texture variation. Our urban areas are scattered. Rain totals from a hurricane, drought, of course, is spatially variable. And all these sort of lead to variation in our ecological responses. So how do we actually want to do that then? Well, this is sort of then what our ecosystems look like, right? We have different ecosystems that sort of play out across the continent, deserts, grasslands, different kinds of forests. And this is what the ecologists sort of have to deal with then. So this is what sort of we then deal with, that spatial variation. And if we want to actually then compare that, we have to have sort of comparable data if we want to look at these different types of ecosystems. So this is just plant production across the y-axis and precipitation on the x-axis. So to get to this point, we have to have the similar types of data. Well, here's the types of sort of ecological sites that we have from different types of networks. So you've heard about some of these already. So the LT-ARS sites are one type of one color. The LT-ARS sites that Mark Walbridge talked about. The neon sites are up here. NutNet is another type of loosely collected set of ecological sites. And you can see that they're scattered around the country, right? There's really no stratified strategic way that these have been set out. They're sort of scattered around, and there are lots of gaps, right? And if we go into then a particular area in the southwest where I'm from, we can pick up additional sites by going into universities and nonprofit organizations, and we can sort of start to fill in those gaps. But now we're talking to lots of different kinds of people with lots of different kinds of data. But this is really the only way we can actually fill in spatially what's going on across the country. And this is a map that we put together. We actually had 360 sites, and this is not comprehensive, but this is in 2008 we published this in Frontiers in response to the request for information for NEON, when NEON was getting developed. And so just as a fairly quick sort of putting this together with a bunch of ecologists, we came up with like 364 ecological sites in the US. So we have a lot of sites in the US collecting a lot of the information about ecological processes and patterns. But they do it in lots of different kinds of ways. So I would argue that the only way we can actually do anything across the country is by somehow putting these data together in some sensible way. Okay, so that's why we need to do this. It's not easy to do. I'm going to talk to you about a project that I led that we started in 2004 called EcoTrends. And I'll talk about sort of the challenges and the insights, both of those, and not all of them, but some of them. So what we did was we were a group of LT-ER scientists, long-term ecological research, and we also had, within LT-ER, we have USDA scientists from the Agricultural Research Service that Mark Walbridge talked about. We also have Forest Service scientists. So, and then with some of our friends, we got up to 50 research sites. So that's the scatter of the sites that you see here. So it's LT-ER is 26 sites at that time, an additional Forest Service sites, ag research sites, some DOE sites, USGS sites, up to 50 sites. And all of them are long-term ecological research sites. Some of them started in early 1900s, some of them more recent, but they all had to have at least 10 years of data. That was sort of our criteria, collecting both driver data, climate, land use, atmospheric chemistry, things that influence ecological processes and pattern. And then some suite of ecological response data, okay? And then we tried to sort it out, right? We tried to sort of, and I'll talk about a little bit how we did this, but we ended up trying to group those a myriad of data sets into things that we could sort of comprehend, because these had not been tried to do in the past. The LT-ER sites had some semblance of organization, but the rest of the sites did not. So it was quite a bit of challenge. Okay, so here's sort of how we organizationally did this. We had sort of a database that we put together in terms of the source data. Here are the different ecosystem types that were represented, so it's pretty much all the major ecosystem types globally. The database that we put together was sort of what we call the source data. And then we created another database we called sort of derived data. So as you can imagine, as ecologists, we have very, very complicated data sets. And so for NPP, or net primary production, or biomass, we collect biomass in quadrats that are arrayed along transects, and we collect it by species, and we do it multiple times a year. And our data sets are very complicated. And we do those in very different ways, in a grassland versus a desert versus a forest. And so it's very difficult to compare. So what we decided to do is we would compare them on a derived basis on an annual time step. So it's much easier if we say we're going to compare grams per meter squared per year of production in grasslands. Okay, so we're going to ignore how everyone does it individually, and we're going to then get to that grams per meter squared per year. So we're going to compare the derived data. That made our lives a lot easier. We just had to get to those numbers. For forests, then, of course, it's kilograms per hectare per year. So we sort of adjusted those units depending upon the different ecosystems, but we focused on the aggregated or the derived data sets. Okay, so a book came out finally last year. You notice we started in 2004. It took a very long period of time to get to this point. It took a long period of time to actually clean all the data and get to this point. And we'll talk about that as one of the challenges. And all the data are available on this website if you're interested. We still have copies of the book, so just contact me if you'd like me to send those to you. We did a tremendous number of figures and maps comparing continental scale trends and a lot of variables. To do this, we had two committees. We had a science committee. We also had an information management committee because we wanted to make sure that we captured how the data were collected, how they were managed. We included participants from all 50 sites. We standardized several hundred source and derived data sets. The data are online. The synthesis tools or book was published by the USDA, and the website has now been expanded for use by our K-12 site at the Jornada in their Desert Data Jam. So we've continued to use this site extensively, in particular by our K-12 schoolyard LTER. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about sort of challenges and insights. I have 5 of those. We know that our drivers are changing non-linearly. There's non-stationarity, and how do we deal with that? Remember I said these are all long-term sites. So one of the things that we can do with these long-term data, I think, is that they provide us some insights about how these are changing, where are the tipping points, where are the legacies. So we have now diverse sets of sites across. So our LTER sites are mostly natural ecosystems. Our ARS sites, many of those are managed ecosystems. So now we have different types of land use that we can follow through time. So it's only by putting these diverse networks together we can actually look at these different land use types. So we can actually look at these things through time that we couldn't do with sort of one type of network. Okay, another challenge is data comparability. This is very much, how do we compare fire impacts and system recovery when these methods change and they're very different from one site to another, one PI from another. The other speakers have covered this extensively. And I just mentioned we did this by looking at the derived or aggregated data. So here's sort of our view of this. We published this already. So here we had sort of our driver data that's very diverse. Within these, of course, there's a lot of standardization. We put all that together into one database and then worked on this aggregated data. So mostly at an annual time step and let sort of the individuals worry about all the detail. And that had then allowed us to do these sort of our focus really was cross-site comparisons and really across ecosystem comparisons. You can do within site and within year, but we're really sort of looking, across time and across site. What do we need to do to be able to do those cross-site comparisons? And we focused on derived or aggregated data. So this is the kind of map or figure that you'll see in the book. This is net primary production for all the grassland sites. So again, each of these sites will collect it in very different ways. And we looked at, so it's grams per meter squared per year through time. And so these are our grassland sites, and this allows us to actually do these sorts of comparisons when we looked at the derived data. Okay, the next challenge is sort of the variability in data acquisition technology is changing through time. This is a challenge, right? So we have new technology coming online, new sensors. How do we actually match and harmonize our old sensors and our old technology with new technology, we really don't have any new insights other than we need to be able to do that, right? So we have a lot of historic data, and we're going to have to somehow mirror and marry those things into the future. And we all know that, and we're all going to have to take advantage of this sort of big data and the new sensors, and we don't have any new insights to provide on that, other than we're going to have to be able to do that. Oops, wrong way. Okay, this is a really important one, is that we have a lot of data, and we need to be able to take advantage of it. So the data accessibility issue is a really big one, and I think that we knew that LTE-ARS sites had a lot of data, but we didn't know really how much data was out there. And we also know that people are putting a lot of data online, and so we call that available data, and this is now really getting at accessible data. Can people actually use it and get access to it? And we need to be able to really take advantage of the data that are out there. So we really think that one of the insights is we need to really embrace big data, and one of the ways to do this is to have this we have a theory, and we're generating hypotheses, and typically what ecologists do is we generate a hypothesis, we test the hypothesis with data, and then we're done. We come out, we come into the database, we do some statistical analyses, and then we're out, right? We write our paper, and we go on. And what we're suggesting is actually this is a tremendous wealth of data, and we've done a lot of now going back into the database, the Ecotrends database, and generating additionally, we come in, we generate a hypothesis, we test it, we come back, we do some analyses, we go back into the database, we generate another hypothesis, we test it, write another paper, we go back into the database, we go out and test it with an experiment, we go back into the database. I mean, these tremendous amount of power in these databases. We don't have to run right out and do an experiment right away, because there's a tremendous amount of power in the database that we currently have. We just have to make them more accessible to everyone. So eventually, we do need to do new experiments, but they can be very focused after we've gone through as much as we can with our existing data. And of course, we generate products and tools. Okay, and finally, the other one, which was just touched upon, is the importance of humans in this process. So here's an example from the Jornada. This is if we have, this is primary production and precipitation, and this is just graphing what we typically would do if you grab it from the internet. But as with internal knowledge at the site, what we did is we graphed this versus a period of wet years. The last 2004 to 2008 was actually a period of extreme wet years. When we pull those wet years out, you can see that we actually get a very different slope of the regression line. So I think that we have to be really careful about taking advantage of big data without knowledge of the site. We have to really work with the community and have community engagement and be very smart about how we use these data. Okay, so we can pull all these insights. This is my summary slide. We can pull all of these insights and challenges together because they're all linked, right? So it's data accessibility or data availability. We have a lot of data, it's available, but can we use it? That's the accessibility issue. Then we have our derived data, our new technology, and our interpretations. Historically, I think we were here. We talked a lot about available data, getting the data from cards and getting it entered, getting metadata. That was our problem, right? I think we're past that now. I really do. I think now we're at this accessibility issue. We have a lot of data online. A lot of data online are not right. They're not formatted. We don't check them very well. So we spend a tremendous amount of time in Ecotrends cleaning data that have been put up there because we have this rule in the United States where within 2 years it has to be posted online. But there's no rule that says it has to be posted online correctly. So this is very true. So we spend a lot of time cleaning data. This is amazing. So the other thing is our websites are not very good. So the other thing we do is really have to make our data really very much accessible before we can even think about getting new interpretations and dealing with these problems that we have to deal with in putting these data together from diverse from networks. Thank you.
Thank you.